The red dust of Mars had a way of getting into everything. Dr. Marcus Webb reflected as he brushed yet another layer of the stuff from his excavation notes. 3 years of working on Colony 7, and he still found Martian soil in places that defied all logic: his coffee mug, his shower drain, even somehow inside sealed equipment containers. It was as if the planet itself was determined to remind everyone that they were visitors here, temporary guests in an ancient world that had been keeping secrets long before humans learned to look up at the stars. Marcus preferred it that way. Temporary was safe. Temporary meant you didn't get too attached, didn't build connections that could be severed without warning by disease, accident, or the thousand other ways the universe had of reminding you that nothing lasted forever. He was cataloging crystal formations from the morning's dig when he heard the sound, a soft whimpering that seemed to echo through the empty corridors of the research facility. Marcus paused, listening carefully. Colony 7's main settlement was half a kilometer away, and the research complex was usually deserted after sunset, except for the automated systems that hummed through their nightly maintenance cycles. The sound came again, definitely organic and definitely distressed. Marcus followed the noise through the maze of corridors that connected the various laboratories and storage facilities, his footsteps echoing against the reinforced walls that protected the complex from Mars's harsh environment. The whimpering led him to Lab 7, the xenolinguistics section that had been Dr. Lyanna Starweaver's domain until the shuttle accident 3 days ago. He found the source of the sound crouched behind a stack of translation equipment, partially hidden by shadows, and what appeared to be a small floating drone that was projecting soft, melodic tones. "Hello," Marcus called out gently, crouching down to appear less threatening. "It's okay, I'm not going to hurt you." The figure shifted slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of large, luminous eyes and the distinctive pointed ears that marked her as Etherian. Dr. Starweaver's daughter, he realized with a start. Kira, if he remembered correctly from the few times he'd seen her around the facility. The little girl, she couldn't be more than 8 or 9 years old, pressed herself further back against the equipment, her silver-tinged skin shimmering with patterns that Marcus knew indicated extreme emotional distress in Etherian physiology. The floating drone beside her beeped softly and projected a translation in heavily accented English. The small mistress declares that she requires no assistance from strangers and wishes to be left to commune with her sorrows in the traditional manner of her ancestors. The drone announced in what sounded suspiciously like Shakespearean verse. Also, she would like to know if you have any cookies. Marcus blinked. Cookies. Pip sometimes adds his own editorial comments to translations, came a small voice from behind the equipment stack. Kira peered around the edge of a molecular analyzer, her eyes bright with tears. He thinks everything sounds better in old Earth poetry. "Ah," Marcus said, settling himself cross-legged on the lab floor to appear less intimidating. "That explains the dramatic flair. I'm Marcus Webb from the archaeology department. We haven't been formally introduced." "I know who you are," Kira said quietly. "Mama talked about your work with the crystal formations. She said you listened to rocks." "Well, I listened to what the rocks have to tell us about the people who used to live here," Marcus corrected gently. "Your mother was helping me understand some of the linguistic patterns carved into the older formations." At the mention of her mother, Kira's shimming patterns intensified, her skin cycling through shades of silver and pale blue that Marcus recognized as grief indicators from his xenobiology studies. Pip floated closer to her, emitting comforting tones while simultaneously projecting another translation. The young princess declares that her mother's absence has created a vast emptiness in the cosmos, and she fears that the cold void of space has claimed her parents' essence for all eternity, Pip announced with theatrical gravity. She also requests permission to remain in this sanctuary of learning, where her mother's spirit still dwells. "She wants to stay here," Marcus asked, surprised. "Kira, the social workers are looking for you. They're worried sick." Kira emerged more fully from her hiding place, revealing tear-streaked cheeks and clothing that suggested she'd been in the lab for quite some time. They want to send me to Europa Station, to live with my cousin Velter and his family. That sounds like a good thing, family to take care of you. Velter thinks children should be seen and not heard, Kira said with the kind of adult weariness that no 8-year-old should possess. He says my gift with the crystals is unseemly for a proper Etherian child. Mama said he just doesn't understand that some abilities are meant to be celebrated, not hidden. Marcus felt something twist in his chest at the lost tone in her voice. He recognized that particular brand of loneliness, the feeling of being fundamentally misunderstood by the people who were supposed to care about you. What kind of gift? Instead of answering verbally, Kira reached out to touch one of the crystal sample containers on a nearby shelf. Immediately, the entire collection began to glow with soft, harmonious light, their internal structures resonating in patterns that Marcus had never seen in 3 years of study. That's incredible, Marcus breathed, watching the display with professional fascination. How do you do that? I don't know, Kira admitted, pulling her hand back as the crystals faded to their normal appearance. It just happens when I touch them. Mama said it meant I was special, but Velter says it's just showing off. Pip bobbed indignantly and projected another translation. The noble child possesses gifts that rival the ancient crystal singers of legend, yet faces persecution from those who fear what they cannot comprehend. Pip gets very dramatic when he's upset, Kira explained with a small smile that was the first genuine expression Marcus had seen from her. Mama programmed him with too many poetry databases. Marcus found himself smiling back despite the gravity of the situation. He certainly has a flair for the theatrical, but Kira, you can't stay here indefinitely. The colony has rules about unaccompanied minors, and— Please, Kira interrupted, her luminous eyes fixed on his with desperate intensity. I know you don't know me very well, but Mama said you were kind. She said you understood what it was like to lose people you loved. Marcus felt as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Dr. Starweaver had known about Sarah and Emma, about the plague that had taken his wife and daughter while he was off-world on a research expedition, too far away to even say goodbye. She said you came to Mars to be alone with old things that couldn't die and leave you, Kira continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand that feeling now, but these crystals, this place where Mama worked, they're all I have left of her. If I go to Europa Station, I'll lose that too. Marcus stared at the little girl, seeing his own grief reflected in her young face. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him safe and isolated for 3 years, told him to contact social services immediately. Kira needed proper care from people who understood Etherian culture and physiology. She needed family, stability, a normal childhood. But the part of him that remembered holding his own daughter, the part that had been carefully buried under layers of professional detachment and emotional numbness, recognized something in Kira's desperate plea. She wasn't just asking for a place to stay. She was asking for someone to understand that sometimes being alone was less frightening than being unwanted. The social workers will be here in the morning, Marcus said finally. They're going to want to take you to Europa Station. Kira's shoulders sagged in defeat, her skin cycling through patterns of resignation that made Marcus's heart ache. But, he continued, surprising himself, maybe we can figure out a way for you to spend some time here first. To help me understand what your mother was working on with the crystal translations. Would you like that? The change in Kira's expression was immediate and dramatic, her skin brightening to patterns that Marcus was pretty sure indicated hope. Really, you'd let me help? Well, I don't know anything about taking care of children, Marcus admitted. And I'm pretty sure my food synthesizer only makes things that taste like cardboard. But your mother left some research notes that I can't decipher without her linguistic databases, and you seem to have an unusual connection to the subject matter. Pip spun in excited circles, projecting translation updates. The generous scholar offers sanctuary to the orphan princess. Joy fills the cosmos like stars being born from stellar dust. Also, the small mistress suggests that Etherian children require actual nutrition, not cardboard-flavored sustenance. He's not wrong about the nutrition thing, Kira said, giggling for the first time since Marcus had found her. Etherian metabolism requires specific mineral compounds that human food doesn't usually contain. Marcus looked at the child's thin frame and realized she probably hadn't eaten properly in days. Right. Okay. First priority is figuring out how to feed you something that won't make you sick. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go along. As they made their way to Marcus's quarters, the only residential space in the research complex, Marcus tried to ignore the voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like his late wife, asking him what the hell he thought he was doing getting involved with a grieving alien child when he'd spent 3 years avoiding any kind of emotional connection. The truth was, he didn't know what he was doing. But looking at Kira, seeing the way she held herself with the careful dignity of someone trying very hard not to be a burden, Marcus realized that maybe avoiding connections wasn't the same thing as avoiding pain. Maybe some things were worth the risk of getting hurt again. Marcus, Kira asked as they reached his quarters, her voice small and uncertain. Do you think Mama would be okay with me staying here for a while? Marcus looked down at her, at the hope and fear warring in her expression, and made what was probably the most impulsive decision of his carefully controlled life. I think, he said gently, your mother would want you to be somewhere you felt safe and understood. And if that place happens to be a dusty research station with a man who talks to rocks and a dramatic translation drone, then maybe that's exactly where you're supposed to be. Kira's answering smile was brighter than any crystal formation Marcus had ever seen. Marcus woke to the sound of what he initially mistook for the colony's emergency alarm system, but quickly realized was actually Pip projecting dramatic funeral dirges at maximum volume. He stumbled out of bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes since he'd given Kira his only spare blanket and hadn't wanted to disturb her by rummaging through his belongings. Pip, what's wrong? He called out, padding barefoot toward the common area where he'd set up a makeshift sleeping area for Kira on his couch. The couch was empty. The young mistress has departed in great distress, Pip announced, his usual theatrical flair replaced by genuine panic. Social services officers arrived at dawn's first light, and the noble child fled like a startled deer into the crystal caves beneath the facility. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. She went into the caves. Pip, those tunnels haven't been properly mapped yet. She could get lost down there or worse. Fear not, brave scholar, Pip interrupted, spinning in agitated circles. This humble mechanical servant maintains telepathic contact with the young princess through her natural Etherian broadcast frequencies. She lives, but her emotional emanations suggest profound distress. Can you track her location? Alas, the crystal formations interfere with precise positioning data. But I can guide us toward her general vicinity through the harmonious resonance of her unique neural signature. Marcus was already pulling on his boots and grabbing his emergency kit. He'd only been in the Martian crystal caves a handful of times, always with full expedition gear and experienced guides. The network of tunnels carved by ancient geological processes extended for kilometers beneath the colony, filled with crystalline formations that were beautiful but potentially dangerous to navigate without proper equipment. Have the social services people been notified? Director Chen awaits your contact, Pip replied, projecting a holographic display of several missed communications. She seemed most displeased by the young mistress's dramatic escape. Marcus keyed his comm unit as they headed toward the cave entrance behind the research facility. Director Chen, this is Dr. Webb. I understand there's been a situation with Kira. Dr. Webb, came the crisp reply, tinged with professional frustration. I don't suppose you have any idea why an 8-year-old Etherian child would choose to flee into dangerous cave systems rather than accompany trained social workers to a perfectly suitable foster placement. That children don't always respond logically to traumatic situations, Marcus said diplomatically, though privately he suspected Kira's response was entirely logical from her perspective. I'm going after her now. Absolutely not. Dr. Webb, you are not authorized for solo cave exploration, and you have no training in child psychology or Etherian behavioral patterns. We'll assemble a proper search team. Director with respect that will take hours. Kira is scared, alone, and possibly injured. I have a way to track her location and I'm going now. Marcus cut the connection before Director Chen could argue further, then followed Pip toward the cave entrance, trying to ignore the voice in his head that sounded remarkably like his late wife telling him he was about to do something spectacularly stupid. The crystal caves were even more magnificent than Marcus had remembered, their walls lined with formations that caught and reflected his flashlight beam in cascading patterns of color. The air was warmer than the surface, heated by geothermal activity that created a comfortable microclimate despite Mars's thin atmosphere. Under different circumstances, he would have been fascinated by the geological implications. She went deeper, Pip announced, his sensors sweeping the tunnel ahead. The resonance patterns suggest she sought the maximum distance from surface vibrations. They descended through passages that grew progressively narrower and more complex, following a route that seemed to have been carved by water millions of years ago when Mars still had flowing rivers. Marcus tried not to think about how easy it would be to get lost in this maze, or what would happen if his flashlight failed. Pip, are you still picking up her signal? Affirmative, noble explorer. Though her emotional broadcasts have shifted from fear to what I can only describe as wonder, most intriguing. They found her in a vast underground chamber filled with crystal formations, unlike anything in Marcus's experience. The structures rose from floor to ceiling in spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse with their own internal light, creating a cathedral of living mineral that took his breath away. Kira sat in the center of the chamber, surrounded by crystals that glowed with soft, harmonious frequencies. Her silver-tinged skin reflected their light, making her appear almost ethereal as she hummed along with resonances that Marcus could barely perceive. "Kira," he called out gently, not wanting to startle her, "are you all right?" She looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her years. "They're singing," she said simply, "all of them. They've been singing for millions of years, but nobody was listening." Marcus approached carefully, noting how the crystal formations seemed to respond to her presence with increased luminosity. "What are they singing about?" "Stories," Kira replied, "the legal complexities of an alien child wanting to remain with a human guardian turned out to be roughly equivalent to explaining quantum physics to a particularly stubborn rock formation." Marcus discovered this 3 weeks into what he'd optimistically assumed would be a straightforward temporary custody arrangement, when his morning coffee was interrupted by the arrival of 3 different legal delegations, each with conflicting jurisdictional claims. "Dr. Webb," announced Counselor Zethkar, an imposingly tall Etherian diplomat whose robe seemed designed to make everyone else feel underdressed. "The Etherian Council has serious concerns about young Kira's continued residence in what can only be described as culturally inappropriate circumstances." Marcus glanced at Kira, who was sitting at the kitchen table teaching Pip to play what appeared to be 3-dimensional chess using holographic projections and running commentary that would have made Shakespeare weep with envy. She'd been with him for 3 weeks now, and the dark circles under her eyes had faded. Her skin patterns had stabilized into healthier silver-blue spirals, and she'd actually gained weight on a diet that Marcus had learned to prepare through a combination of research, trial, and error that had nearly poisoned them both twice. "Counselor," Marcus replied carefully, "Kira is thriving here. Her emotional stability has improved dramatically, and she's making remarkable progress with her studies. Studies? Counselor Zethkar's tone suggested profound skepticism. What manner of education can a human provide to an Etherian child? Our young require instruction in telepathic protocols, harmonic mathematics, and the cultural traditions that have sustained our people for millennia. I'm teaching her xenoarchaeology, comparative linguistics, and crystal resonance theory, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice level. Plus, she's been helping me decode ancient Martian inscriptions that have puzzled researchers for decades. From the kitchen table, Pip projected a helpful translation. The noble scholar provides educational opportunities that would make the ancient philosophers weep with joy. Also, the young mistress has mastered the art of making breakfast without burning down the kitchen, which represents significant progress in domestic science. Pip, we've talked about editorial comments, Kira said with fond exasperation, then looked up at the counselor with surprising composure. Counselor Zethkar, I appreciate the council's concern for my welfare, but I'm learning things here that I could never learn in a traditional Etherian educational environment. Such as? The counselor asked with barely concealed condescension. Instead of answering verbally, Kira stood and walked to the crystal display case that Marcus had set up to showcase some of his research specimens. She placed her hands on the containment field, and immediately the entire collection began to glow with patterns that Marcus had never seen before. The Martian crystals are telling the story of the Great Migration, Kira said, her eyes unfocused as she interpreted the harmonic resonances. 2 million years ago, when the climate changed and the water began to disappear. They remember the songs the Martians sang as they prepared to leave their world behind, hoping someone would find them someday and understand their story. The room fell silent except for the crystalline harmonics that seemed to carry actual meaning, emotional resonance that transcended species barriers. Even Counselor Zethkar looked shaken by the display. This is highly unusual, he admitted reluctantly. Etherian children do not typically manifest such advanced crystalline interface abilities until adolescence, if at all. Maybe that's because they're not usually given the opportunity to explore their gifts in environments where those abilities are valued rather than suppressed, Marcus said pointedly. Before the counselor could respond, the second delegation made their presence known. Corporate representative Diana Sterling swept into the room with the kind of confidence that came from having more money than entire planetary governments, followed by 2 assistants carrying scanning equipment and legal tablets. Dr. Webb, she announced without preamble, I'm here on behalf of Meridian Research Corporation. We understand you've been harboring a child with remarkable abilities that could revolutionize our understanding of crystalline data storage technologies. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with Mars's atmosphere. Harboring? She's not contraband, Miss Sterling. She's a child who recently lost her mother. A child whose unique abilities represent potentially billions in research applications, Sterling replied smoothly. Meridian is prepared to offer young Kira a full scholarship to our Advanced Studies program on Europa Station, where she would receive the finest education credits can buy while contributing to groundbreaking scientific research. Contributing how, exactly? Marcus asked, though he was fairly certain he didn't want to hear the answer. Non-invasive studies of her crystalline interface capabilities, of course. Brain scans, genetic analysis, perhaps some experimental interaction protocols with our quantum storage systems. All perfectly safe and potentially beneficial for developing similar abilities in other subjects. Kira had gone very still beside the crystal display, her skin cycling through patterns that Marcus had learned to recognize as fear mixed with anger. Pip floated protectively near her, his sensors focused on the corporate delegation with what could only be described as mechanical hostility. The acquisitive merchants seek to transform the young princess into a laboratory specimen, Pip announced with unusual venom. Their intentions bring dishonor to the noble tradition of learning. That's quite enough from the malfunctioning translator, Sterling said dismissively. We're talking about providing this child with opportunities that her current guardian simply cannot offer. You're talking about exploiting her, Marcus said flatly, using her abilities for corporate profit while calling it education. I'm talking about recognizing potential and providing proper resources for its development, Sterling countered. Dr. Webb, with all due respect, you're a xenoarchaeologist living in a research facility. You're hardly equipped to provide for a growing child's needs, let alone one with such unique requirements. The third delegation chose that moment to make their entrance, led by Director Chen and flanked by two social services caseworkers who looked like they'd rather be dealing with straightforward paperwork violations. Dr. Webb, Director Chen said with the weary tone of someone who'd spent too many late nights dealing with bureaucratic complications. We need to discuss the irregularities in young Kira's custody situation. According to our records, you have no legal standing as her guardian, no training in child psychology or Etherian physiology, and no long-term plan for her care and education. Marcus looked around the room at the various officials, all of whom seemed to have very definite ideas about what was best for Kira despite none of them having spent more than 5 minutes actually talking to her. The familiar feeling of helplessness that he'd experienced after his wife and daughter's deaths threatened to overwhelm him. The sense that bureaucratic machinery was grinding forward regardless of human or alien needs. That's when Kira stepped forward, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that belied her age. "I appreciate everyone's concern for my welfare, but I think there's something you all need to understand." She walked to the center of the room, her luminescent skin beginning to glow with patterns that Marcus had never seen before, complex spirals of gold and silver that seemed to pulse with their own inner rhythm. "My name is Kira Starweaver," she continued, "and I am the daughter of Dr. Lyanna Starweaver, who died serving the cause of interspecies understanding. My mother taught me that family isn't just about genetics or species or cultural traditions. Family is about people who see your true self and love you anyway." The glow around her intensified, and suddenly Marcus could feel it, not just see it, but actually sense the emotional resonance that Etherian children projected when they felt completely safe and loved. "Marcus doesn't just tolerate my abilities," Kira said, looking directly at him with eyes that seemed far too mature for her age. "He celebrates them. He doesn't try to hide what makes me different or use it for profit or force me to fit into categories that were never designed for someone like me. He just lets me be exactly who I am." She turned to face the assembled officials, her chin raised with stubborn determination that reminded Marcus powerfully of her mother. "So if you want to take me away from the only person who's made me feel like I belong somewhere since Mama died, you're going to have to explain to me why your plans for my life are more important than my choice to stay with my family." The silence that followed was broken only by Pip's soft projection. "The young princess has spoken truth that resonates through all the harmonics of justice and love. Also, anyone who attempts to remove her from this sanctuary shall face the mechanical wrath of her loyal companion." Director Chen cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Kira, sweetheart, children don't get to make decisions about their own custody. Adults have to make those choices based on what's best for your long-term welfare." "Then maybe," Marcus said quietly, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice, "it's time the adults in this room started listening to what she's actually telling us about her welfare." He moved to stand beside Kira, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "I didn't ask for this situation. 3 weeks ago, my biggest concern was whether the coffee synthesizer would survive another week. But this remarkable child chose to trust me with her grief and her gifts, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone turn her into a test subject or force her into a cultural box that doesn't fit who she's becoming. Dr. Webb, Counselor Zethkar began, while your intentions may be admirable. My intentions, Marcus interrupted, are to make sure Kira grows up feeling loved, valued, and free to explore her potential without fear. If that means learning Etherian cultural traditions, fine. If it means contributing to research that benefits everyone, excellent. But it's going to happen on her terms, at her pace, with her consent. He looked around the room at the various officials, all of whom seemed suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of his conviction. And if any of you have a problem with that, Marcus continued, then I suggest you start figuring out how to work within a framework that puts her needs first, because I'm not going anywhere, and neither is she. Kira's hand slipped into his, her skin patterns shifting to warm gold spirals that felt like gratitude and home and the promise of tomorrows worth fighting for. 5 years later, Dr. Marcus Webb stood in the same crystal chamber where he'd found 13-year-old Kira, teaching a group of graduate students how to interpret Martian historical records through harmonic resonance patterns. Her silver-touched skin had deepened to more complex patterns as she'd grown, and her pointed ears had developed the elegant length that marked her approaching adulthood. But her enthusiasm for sharing knowledge remained exactly the same as the frightened 8-year-old who'd hidden in his lab. The key is not trying to impose human analytical frameworks on Martian data structures, she was explaining to the fascinated students. Their civilization thought in terms of temporal layering. Each crystal formation contains not just one story, but multiple narratives across different time periods. You have to learn to listen for the harmonics that separate the layers. Marcus watched with pride as she demonstrated, her hands moving gracefully over a crystal cluster that responded with cascading patterns of light and sound. The ancient Martian archives that her abilities had revealed had revolutionized xenoarchaeology, earning her recognition from universities across the solar system despite her age. Professor Webb, called out one of the students, using the title Kira had insisted on adopting when she'd started helping with his research classes. How do you distinguish between historical narrative and cultural mythology in the crystal recordings? That's an excellent question, David, Kira replied, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone who genuinely loved teaching. The mythological recordings have different harmonic structures. They tend to be more emotionally resonant but less temporally specific. Historical records have what I call chronological anchors, reference points that tie them to specific environmental or astronomical events. Pip floated nearby, providing occasional translation clarifications with his usual dramatic flair, though his commentary had become considerably more sophisticated over the years. The noble princess demonstrates wisdom beyond her years, he announced. Her interpretive abilities would make the ancient crystal singers weep with joy. Pip, we've talked about the princess thing, Kira said with fond exasperation that had become a familiar routine. I'm just Kira. To this humble mechanical servant you shall always be royalty, Pip replied with mechanical dignity. Also, your father requests your presence in the main lab when the lesson concludes. Marcus smiled at the casual way Pip used the word father. The legal adoption had been finalized 2 years ago, after a lengthy process that had involved negotiations between 3 different legal systems and more paperwork than Marcus had known existed in the universe. But the emotional adoption had happened much earlier, probably sometime during Kira's first week with him, when she'd fallen asleep at his workstation, and he'd realized he would fight the entire galaxy to keep her safe. Wrap up the lesson, sweetheart, Marcus called out. Our guests should be arriving soon. The guests in question were a delegation from the Etherian Cultural Council, including Counselor Zethkar, who had become an unlikely ally over the years. It turned out that Kira's unique abilities had applications beyond Martian archaeology. She could interface with Etherian cultural archives in ways that even traditional scholars found remarkable, leading to discoveries about their own ancient history that had been lost for millennia. Students, your assignment for next week is to practice harmonic listening exercises with the basic crystal formations in Lab 3, Kira announced as she began packing up her demonstration materials. Remember, don't try to force the connections. Let the crystals show you what they want to share. As the students filed out, chattering excitedly about crystal harmonics and temporal data layering, Marcus reflected on how much their lives had changed since that first desperate night when Kira had hidden in his lab. The research facility had expanded into a proper xenocultural studies center, with Kira serving as both student and instructor depending on the subject matter. "Dad," Kira said, appearing at his elbow with the silent movement she'd perfected over the years, "you're doing that proud parent thing again." "I'm allowed to do the proud parent thing," Marcus replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Especially when my daughter just taught a graduate-level seminar on advanced xenolinguistics and made it look effortless." "It is effortless for me," Kira said simply. "That's what makes it so important to share. Mama always said that abilities are gifts meant to be given, not hoarded." The arrival of the Etherian delegation interrupted their conversation, led by Counselor Zethkar, who had aged considerably since their first confrontational meeting, but had developed a genuine warmth toward both Marcus and Kira. "Young Kira," he said with formal courtesy that barely concealed his affection, "the Council has reviewed your latest cultural archive translations. Your insights into the pre-contact period have filled gaps in our historical records that we thought were lost forever. It's amazing what you can discover when you approach ancient records with curiosity instead of preconceptions," Kira replied diplomatically, though Marcus caught the slight emphasis on preconceptions that suggested she remembered their early encounters quite clearly. "Indeed," the counselor agreed with something that might have been sheepishness. "Which brings me to the reason for today's visit. The council has—" Alina stared at Queen Zephyra with the expression of someone who'd just been offered the opportunity to collaborate with the fundamental forces of the universe, assuming the fundamental forces of the universe wore elegant alien features, and possessed an intellect that made quantum mechanics look like elementary arithmetic. Around the laboratory, she could sense her colleagues holding their collective breath, waiting to see if she would accept what amounted to either the greatest scientific opportunity in human history or a one-way ticket to intellectual inadequacy. Elena began, then stopped as Princess Lyanna stepped closer, her violet eyes carrying an intensity that seemed to peer directly into Elena's soul. For a moment, Elena wondered if this was what it felt like to be examined under a microscope by someone whose understanding of microscopy transcended conventional reality. "Dr. Vasquez," Princess Lyanna said, her musical voice carrying undertones of carefully controlled hope, "before you answer, perhaps you should understand the full scope of what collaboration with me would entail. I sense that you have reservations." Elena nodded, grateful for the princess's perceptiveness. "It's not that I don't want to work with you, it's that I'm terrified I'll disappoint you. I mean, you've developed theoretical frameworks that could revolutionize consciousness studies, biotechnology, and quantum physics simultaneously. Meanwhile, my greatest achievement this month was successfully growing fungal samples that glow in mathematically interesting patterns." Princess Lyanna's ears shifted in what Alina was learning to recognize as an expression of gentle amusement. "Your bioluminescent fungi research represents precisely the kind of foundation work that could prove essential to understanding conscious biotechnology. May I examine your samples?" Alina gestured toward her workstation with hands that were only slightly trembling. "They're just preliminary cultures, nothing revolutionary. I've been trying to determine whether their light patterns correspond to actual information processing, or just random biochemical reactions." Princess Lyanna moved to the microscope with fluid grace, adjusting the controls with the casual expertise of someone familiar with technology far more advanced than anything in Alina's laboratory. After a moment of observation, she looked up with an expression that made Alina's heart skip several beats. "Dr. Vasquez," the princess said, her voice carrying harmonic frequencies that seemed to make the air itself more attentive. "These organisms are not producing random patterns. They are demonstrating rudimentary quantum consciousness. Each pulse corresponds to quantum field fluctuations that suggest the fungi are processing information at the molecular level." Alina felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. "You mean they're actually thinking, at some level?" "More than thinking," Princess Lyanna said, her excitement beginning to show despite her regal composure. "They appear to be communicating. Watch this pattern. Each pulse sequence contains mathematical relationships that correspond to the growth patterns of neighboring cultures. They are sharing information about their environment and coordinating their development accordingly." Alina leaned over the microscope, studying patterns she'd been observing for weeks without recognizing their true significance. "So they're not just conscious, they're collaborative. They're working together to optimize their collective growth and adaptation." "Exactly. And if we could understand the mechanism by which they achieve this quantum-level communication, we might be able to develop biotechnological systems that combine individual consciousness with collective intelligence. Living computers that could think both independently and as part of a larger network." Alina's scientific mind began racing through possibilities, implications cascading like quantum reactions through her consciousness. "We could create biological systems that maintain individual identity while sharing collective knowledge. Medical networks that could diagnose conditions by sharing experiential data. Environmental restoration projects that could adapt and coordinate across entire ecosystems." "Now you begin to see the potential," Princess Lyanna said, and her smile was like watching a sun rise over an alien world. "This is why I have been seeking human collaboration. Your species approaches scientific problems with intuitive leaps and creative connections that complement our more systematic methodologies." Queen Zephyra had been observing this exchange with growing satisfaction, her psychic aura shifting to something that felt almost like parental pride. "My daughter has waited many cycles to find researchers capable of matching her enthusiasm for impossible questions." Alina looked up from the microscope, suddenly aware that she was engaged in the most intellectually stimulating conversation of her life, with someone whose casual observations were rewriting her understanding of biological consciousness. "Princess, I have to ask, why me? I mean, there are researchers with much more impressive credentials, better laboratories, more advanced equipment." Princess Lyanna's expression grew thoughtful, her elegant hands moving in gestures that seemed to illustrate complex emotional concepts. "Dr. Vasquez, do you know what it feels like to be the only person in a room who finds a particular subject fascinating? To have ideas that excite you beyond measure, but no one to share them with because everyone else finds them either incomprehensible or intimidating?" Alina nodded slowly. "Actually, yes. That's pretty much my entire career in xenobiology. Most people think studying alien microorganisms is either boring or pointless." "Precisely. When I observe your work, your approaches to complex problems, I recognize someone who genuinely loves the process of discovery, rather than just the recognition that comes from publication. You study these organisms because their behavior genuinely fascinates you, not because you expect them to make you famous." Alina felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the laboratory's environmental controls. "You're saying you want to work with me because I'm genuinely curious about impossible things?" "I am saying," Princess Lyanna replied, her voice carrying undertones of hope that made Alina. 3 months after that first chaotic meeting in the laboratory, Alina stood in her newly expanded research facility watching Princess Lyanna demonstrate quantum consciousness manipulation to a group of visiting scientists who were trying very hard not to look as intellectually overwhelmed as they felt. The princess moved with fluid grace among the bioluminescent cultures, her elegant hands directing quantum field fluctuations that caused the organisms to pulse in synchronized patterns that spelled out mathematical equations in living light. The key principle, Princess Lyanna explained, her musical voice carrying easily across the laboratory, is that consciousness operates as a fundamental force that can interface directly with quantum field structures. By achieving harmonic resonance with the organism's natural frequencies, we can encourage them to express their inherent computational abilities. Alina watched from her position beside the main monitoring station, still marveling at how seamlessly their collaboration had developed once they'd moved past the initial terror of intellectual inadequacy. Their working relationship had evolved into something that transcended simple research partnership. They had become intellectual companions whose minds seemed to operate in natural harmony, each contributing perspectives that enhanced the other's understanding. "Alina," Princess Lyanna called, using the informal address they'd adopted after Alina explained that constant royal protocols made actual conversation nearly impossible. "Would you demonstrate the caffeine enhancement protocols we developed?" Alina grinned, moving to join the princess beside the cultivation tanks. "Right, so this is where my contribution to interstellar science gets really embarrassing. It turns out that mild stimulants can actually enhance the quantum consciousness effects in these organisms, but only if you talk to them while administering the compounds." Dr. Harrison, still adjusting to the new reality where his research station hosted the most advanced consciousness studies in known space, raised his hand tentatively. "Dr. Vasquez, when you say talk to them, do you mean vocal stimulation affects their quantum states?" "Not just vocal stimulation," Alina explained, carefully adjusting the nutrient flow to one of the cultivation chambers. "Conscious intention combined with verbal communication. Watch this." She leaned closer to the organisms, speaking in the conversational tone she developed over months of late-night research sessions. "Hey there, little guys. We've got some visitors today who want to see your mathematical light show. Think you could pulse out some Fibonacci sequences for us?" The bioluminescent cultures responded immediately, their light patterns shifting to display the famous mathematical sequence in cascading waves of blue and gold luminescence. The visiting scientists made collective sounds of amazement, while Alina felt the familiar thrill of witnessing consciousness express itself through living mathematics. The organisms respond to conscious intention, directed toward them with genuine interest and respect, Princess Lyanna added, her violet eyes sparkling with the shared joy of discovery. Alina's approach treats them as collaborative partners rather than research subjects, which appears to enhance their willingness to demonstrate their capabilities. Queen Zephyra entered the laboratory at that moment, her regal presence immediately commanding attention, despite the months of increasing familiarity with the research project. Alina had learned to read the Queen's subtle expressions, and today she sensed satisfaction mixed with something that might have been maternal pride. "Your Majesty," Alina said, offering the informal greeting they'd established, perfect timing. "We were just showing everyone the collaborative consciousness work." "Indeed," Queen Zephyra replied, her psychic aura radiating approval that made the entire laboratory feel more harmonious. "I have come to discuss the expansion proposals with both of you." Alina and Princess Lyanna exchanged glances, their communication having developed to the point where entire conversations could be conducted through subtle expression and quantum-enhanced intuition. The Zarathian Science Council has approved the establishment of a permanent joint research facility, Queen Zephyra announced, causing Dr. Harrison to make a small choking sound that he tried to disguise as a cough. They are particularly interested in Alina's proposed applications for conscious biotechnology in medical and environmental restoration projects. Alina felt her knees go slightly weak. Permanent joint facility. As in, a major research installation dedicated to consciousness studies and biotechnology development. With you and my daughter as co-directors, Queen Zephyra confirmed, her smile carrying undertones of deep satisfaction. The council was impressed by your collaborative methodology and the practical applications you have already demonstrated. Princess Lyanna moved closer to Alina, her presence radiating excitement that seemed to make the air itself more energetic. Alina, this means we could expand beyond basic consciousness research. We could develop the medical consciousness networks we discussed, create environmental restoration systems that think and adapt, explore the possibilities for interstellar communication through quantum-conscious organisms. Alina looked around the laboratory that had become her second home, noting how dramatically everything had changed since that first chaotic encounter with alien royalty. Her colleagues no longer hid behind equipment when Princess Lyanna visited. Instead, they competed for opportunities to discuss their own research with someone whose insights could transform their understanding of their chosen fields. "There is one condition," Queen Zephyra said, her voice carrying new harmonics of gentle amusement. "Alina, my daughter has requested that you be granted full cultural liaison status with the Zarathian Empire. This would involve periodic visits to our homeworld for advanced research, and eventually, permanent residence if you choose to accept full partnership in our scientific community." Alina felt the universe tilt slightly on its axis. Full partnership in the most advanced scientific civilization in known space. The most advanced scientific civilization that we know of, Princess Lyanna corrected with gentle humor. There may be others we have yet to discover, which is why we need researchers with your particular combination of intuitive insight and collaborative enthusiasm. Alina looked at Princess Lyanna, seeing not just the brilliant alien scientist who had revolutionized her understanding of consciousness and biotechnology, but the genuine friend who had shared her excitement about impossible questions and late-night breakthrough moments. Their partnership had grown beyond professional collaboration into something that resembled the deep intellectual companionship she'd never expected to find anywhere in the universe. "Princess," Alina said, her voice carrying new confidence born of months of successful